On a frozen January morning in Boston, when snow fell like prayers over empty streets, a young man sat alone on a bench in Boston Common. His name was Dylan Parker, and at 19, he had learned that some families love you until they discover who you really are. The wind cut through his torn Celtics hoodie, and his fingers trembled as they gripped a worn bank card. The same card his mother had pressed into his hands before the cancer took her voice, before she whispered that he must keep it safe because it might change everything. 6 months had passed since Sarah Parker died at Mass General Hospital. 6 months since Dylan discovered that grief could break you, but rejection could shatter you completely. 6 months since his Uncle Patrick made it clear that love had conditions Dylan could never meet. If you believe that kindness can change a life, please subscribe to Heart Stories. Your support helps us share hope when the world feels cold. The morning Sarah died, Dylan's Uncle Patrick stood in the hospital hallway with arms crossed and eyes hard as winter stone. "You're not welcome in this family anymore. Kid, your mother spoiled you with all that acceptance nonsense. But I won't continue her mistakes. Pack your things and find somewhere else to call home." The small house in Southie that had sheltered Dylan's childhood became a memory overnight. The same walls that had heard his quiet confessions about loving someone named Marcus from drama class now stood silent and unwelcoming. Patrick O'Sullivan was a man who measured worth by old rules, who believed that certain kinds of love were sins disguised as sentiment. For 6 months, Dylan had survived on Boston's edges, Pine Street shelter when beds were available, sleeping on cots that smelled of industrial disinfectant and broken dreams, Harvard Square when he could earn money playing guitar for strangers who dropped coins without making eye contact. Odd jobs cleaning offices when his young hands could convince someone he was reliable and desperate enough to work for less than minimum wage. Winter in Boston taught him that cold wasn't just temperature, it was sleeping on concrete that stole warmth from your bones. It was walking past warm restaurants with empty pockets and emptier stomach, watching steam rise from bowls of soup he couldn't afford. It was seeing families laugh together through frosted windows while you stood outside, forgotten and freezing, pressing your face against glass that separated you from a world you used to belong to. But this morning felt different. Dylan held the bank card his mother had treasured, marked with his name and words he had never understood. Trust account. He had carried it for months, afraid to hope it meant anything, afraid to learn it meant nothing. Sarah had gripped his hand so tightly when she gave it to him, her eyes bright with fever and something else. Something that looked like a secret she was dying to tell, but didn't have time left to explain. The snow began falling harder as Dylan stood, his legs stiff from cold and uncertainty. State Street stretched before him, lined with glass towers that scraped the gray Boston sky like monuments to success he had never imagined touching. Each step toward the financial district felt like walking between two worlds. Behind him lay the Common where he had spent countless nights learning that survival required swallowing pride. Ahead lay possibilities that terrified him more than homelessness ever had. The heavy doors of State Street Bank gleamed like mirrors, reflecting a young man whose appearance told stories he wished he could rewrite. As he pushed inside, warmth enveloped him like an embrace he had almost forgotten how to receive. Dylan Parker carried his mother's most powerful lesson with him into that marble lobby. Your worth isn't determined by who rejects you, but by who you choose to become when the world turns away. Inside State Street Bank, marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow prisms across walls lined with oil paintings of Boston's founding fathers. Dylan's worn sneakers squeaked against the polished stone, each step echoing like a question he was afraid to ask. The air smelled of leather and success, of money being moved by people who had never known what it felt like to count coins for a meal. Behind mahogany desks, men and women in tailored suits conducted business with the quiet confidence of people who had never slept on park benches. Their voices carried the measured cadence of prosperity, discussing investments and portfolios while Dylan clutched a bank card that might be worthless. Security guards watched him with professional suspicion, noting his appearance without trying to hide their assessment. At the far end of the executive floor, Alexander Whitman sat in a corner office overlooking Boston Harbor. At 45, Alex commanded Whitman Capital Partners with the fierce intelligence that had lifted him from the streets of Dorchester to the heights of Beacon Hill society. His office windows offered panoramic views of sailboats and success. But Alex rarely looked up from the Bloomberg terminals that tracked his empire's growth. The irony wasn't lost on him. Alex had once been hungry too, sleeping in his car during Harvard Business School, working 3 jobs to pay for textbooks that promised a different life. Success had come gradually, then suddenly, until he forgot what desperation felt like. Now he lived in a penthouse that cost more per month than most families earned in a year, surrounded by art he never looked at and silence that money couldn't fill. But success carried shadows that no amount of wealth could illuminate. In his desk drawer, Alex kept a photograph he rarely looked at but couldn't bring himself to remove. Tommy Whitman, his younger brother, smiling beside the Charles River just months before he died. Tommy had been 22, brilliant, and gay in a family that believed love had rules that couldn't be broken without consequences. When Tommy came out during their junior year at MIT, their parents cut him off completely. No phone calls, no financial support, no acknowledgement that he had ever existed. Alex, consumed with building his empire, told himself it wasn't his battle to fight. He chose silence when Tommy needed support, career advancement when Tommy needed family, ambition when Tommy needed someone to prove that love could overcome fear. The suicide note had been brief, written in Tommy's careful engineering handwriting. Nobody understands. Nobody cares. What's the point of living honestly if honesty makes you invisible? Alex had read those words 1,000 times, carrying guilt like stones in his chest that grew heavier with each successful year that followed. Success felt hollow when built on a foundation of failures that mattered most. This morning, Alex was finalizing a $50 million renewable energy deal with Japanese investors. His phone buzzed constantly with congratulations from board members. Stock prices climbed steadily upward, and everything was perfect except for the emptiness that followed him everywhere like a shadow that success couldn't outrun. The interruption came softly. Maria Santos, the bank's customer service manager, knocked on his door with an expression Alex couldn't read. Maria was the kind of employee who never asked for favors, who worked double shifts to keep her 3 teenagers in college, who handled difficult customers with grace that came from understanding struggle personally. Behind her stood a young man who looked like he'd been sleeping outside, which he probably had. His clothes were clean but worn, his hair needed cutting, and his eyes held the particular wariness of someone who had learned to expect rejection from people in positions of power. Maria explained the situation quickly, respectfully. The young man needed help accessing an old trust account. The regular terminals couldn't pull records that deep, and only Alex's executive system had the clearance necessary for archived files. It was an unusual request, but Maria's judgment was impeccable, and if she thought this warranted Alex's attention, there was probably a good reason. Alex glanced up from his Bloomberg terminal, irritated by the interruption. Homeless kid with a bank card. Probably some mistake. Maybe a scam. Definitely not worth his time when millions of dollars hung in the balance and Japanese investors were waiting for his call. But something in Maria's eyes made him pause, made him remember that kindness costs nothing and takes only moments to provide. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives arrive disguised as inconveniences we almost ignore. The silence that followed stretched between them like a bridge neither man knew how to cross. Alex stared at the computer screen, checking and rechecking the numbers that refused to change no matter how many times he blinked. Dylan sat frozen in the leather chair, afraid that moving might break whatever spell had made this impossible moment real. $2,847,392.16. More money than Dylan had ever imagined possessing. More than entire families in Southie would see in generations of honest work. His mother had died without telling him about this fortune, and now he understood why she had gripped his hands so tightly when she gave him the card. Why her eyes had held secrets she ran out of time to share. Alex's voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. Where did this come from? We need to trace the account history immediately. His fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. accessing databases that hadn't been touched in years, pulling records that painted a picture neither of them had expected to see. The digital trail led back 5 years to Robert Sullivan, known to everyone in Southie as Bobby, Korean War veteran, 88 years old when he died, owner of Sullivan's Pub on East Broadway for 4 decades. The small Irish bar had been a neighborhood landmark, the kind of place where longshoremen drank Guinness after 16-hour shifts and argued about the Red Sox until closing time, where everyone knew your name and your troubles without judgment. Bobby Sullivan's story emerged slowly from digital archives that Alex accessed with growing amazement. Hospital records showed repeated admissions for heart problems, diabetes complications, kidney issues, all the accumulated damage of a life lived hard and long in an era when men didn't complain about pain or ask for help until crisis forced them to surrender pride for survival. But one name appeared consistently in Bobby's visitor logs during those final months of hospital stays and medical procedures. Sarah Parker, night shift nurse at Mass General Hospital, assigned to the cardiac unit where Bobby spent weeks fighting his failing heart, while insurance companies questioned every treatment, and family members who might have cared had long since moved away or stopped calling. The medical notes painted a picture of uncommon kindness between nurse and patient. Sarah stayed past her shifts to play cards with Bobby when sleep wouldn't come, when pain made rest impossible and fear made solitude unbearable. She brought books when television frustrated him, crossword puzzles when his mind needed challenges, and most importantly, she listened to war stories that family members had stopped hearing decades ago. More records revealed the deeper connection that had formed between the dying veteran and the single mother who refused to let him face his final chapter alone. Bobby had overheard Sarah talking to another nurse about her son, about the particular struggles of raising a gay teenager in a neighborhood where acceptance came slowly if it came at all, where traditional values sometimes translated into rejection that destroyed families from within. Bobby recognized something familiar in Sarah's protective love, the fierce determination to shield her child from a world that didn't understand difference, that punished authenticity with isolation. Sarah's devotion to Dylan reminded Bobby of feelings he had buried so deeply he thought they had died along with his hopes for the kind of life other men took for granted. Bobby's own story held similar pain, though he had never spoken of it aloud during an era when men like him lived carefully constructed lives, hiding their true selves behind acceptable facades of bachelorhood and military service. In post-war America, Bobby Sullivan had learned to love silently, to desire privately, to exist in the spaces between what he wanted and what the world would allow him to have without destroying him completely. The loneliness had driven him to drinking, to the gradual erosion of connections that might have sustained him if he had been brave enough to trust others with his truth. But Sarah's kindness had awakened something in Bobby that he thought had died decades ago. The capacity to hope, to believe in the possibility of families built on love rather than obligation, acceptance rather than expectation, chosen connection rather than biological accident. When Bobby learned about Dylan's situation through Sarah's worried conversations with other nurses, when he understood that a boy was facing rejection from family members who should have protected him, Bobby saw an opportunity for the redemption that had eluded him his entire life. Here was a chance to transform a lifetime of hidden love into visible legacy, to ensure that one young person would never face the isolation that had nearly destroyed Bobby himself. The legal documents were meticulous, prepared by lawyers who specialized in estate planning for clients without traditional families. Bobby had sold Sullivan's Pub to developers who wanted to build luxury condominiums, netting $600,000 from property his father had purchased for $800 in 1946. But instead of drinking away his final years, Bobby had done something extraordinary with his unexpected wealth. Sometimes the greatest acts of love come from people we never knew were watching over us, waiting for the perfect moment to transform their pain into our possibility. The weight of Bobby Sullivan's handwritten letter settled between them like a prayer answered after years of silence. Alex read the words aloud slowly, his voice catching on phrases that carried the accumulated weight of a lifetime's worth of unspoken love. For Dylan, the boy whose mother had the kindest hands I ever knew, use this to build the family you deserve, the one that love creates rather than blood demands. Alex looked across his desk at Dylan and saw something that made his chest tighten with painful recognition. The same lost expression Tommy had worn during their last conversation. The desperate hope that someone might understand what it felt like to be rejected for something you couldn't change. Something that was as essential to your identity as breathing or thinking or dreaming about tomorrow. Alex stood abruptly, walked to his office window overlooking Boston Harbor, where sailboats dotted the water like white wings against the gray winter sky. For a moment, he remembered being young enough to believe that success would fill the empty spaces grief had carved in his heart, that money could purchase absolution for the brother he had failed when courage mattered more than career advancement. "I need to tell you something," Alex said without turning around, his reflection in the window looking older than his 45 years. "Something about why this matters more than you probably realize. Why Bobby's gift means everything to me even though we never met. Why your story is connected to mine in ways that feel like destiny or justice or maybe just the universe giving me one last chance to choose love over fear." Alex told Dylan about Tommy, about a younger brother who had been brilliant and kind and brave enough to live honestly in a world that punished honesty with isolation, about parents who chose religious doctrine over their own son's happiness, about relatives who believed that conditional love was the only kind worth offering, about an older brother who chose career ambition over family loyalty when the choice mattered most. Tommy died on the Tobin Bridge on a Tuesday morning in October. Alex continued, his voice steady but hollow with the weight of regret that time couldn't diminish. The note he left was brief, written in his careful engineering handwriting. "Nobody understands. Nobody cares." I read those words every day and know that I could have proven him wrong, but I chose not to. I chose my comfort over his survival, my reputation over his reality. Dylan listened without judgment, recognizing the particular pain that comes from loving people who can't love you back, from wanting acceptance from family members who see your identity as something broken that needs fixing rather than something beautiful that deserves celebration. The difference was that Dylan had lost his family through circumstances he couldn't control, while Alex had lost his through choices he could have made differently. When Alex finished talking, Dylan spoke for the first time since entering the office, his voice soft but certain. "Your brother sounds like he was lucky to have someone who still thinks about him every day, who carries his memory like something precious rather than something shameful. Maybe that matters more than you think it does. Maybe love that continues after death is the most powerful kind there is." The simple observation hit Alex with unexpected force, reframing years of self-recrimination in a way he had never considered. He had spent so long focusing on what he failed to do for Tommy, but Dylan was suggesting something different, that love continues beyond death, that remembering someone with respect and regret keeps their spirit alive in ways that matter, that grief itself can become a form of devotion if channeled toward helping others avoid similar pain. Alex turned from the window and looked directly at Dylan, seeing not a charity case or an interruption, but an opportunity for redemption that felt like a gift from Bobby Sullivan, from Tommy, from the universe itself. "You shouldn't have to spend another night on the streets. We're going to fix this right now, today. Not just the money, but everything else you need to rebuild your life properly, to honor what Bobby intended and what your mother wanted for you." What followed was a masterclass in how privilege could be used for good when guided by genuine compassion rather than obligation. Alex made phone calls to people who made things happen quickly, efficiently, without the bureaucratic delays that usually accompanied requests for help. Within hours, Dylan had a furnished studio apartment in Back Bay, close enough to Boston Common to remember where he came from, but far enough from Pine Street Shelter to represent genuine progress. Alex connected Dylan with Catherine Morrison, a family lawyer who specialized in LGBTQ legal issues and understood the complexities of young people navigating financial and legal systems without family support. Catherine would handle the trust fund paperwork, establish proper investment management, ensure Dylan's newfound wealth would be protected from both external threats and his own inexperience with money that could change his life or destroy it depending on how wisely it was managed. That evening, as they drove through Boston's snowy streets toward Dylan's new apartment, Alex made one final stop that felt like pilgrimage rather than mere courtesy. Mount Auburn Cemetery, where Bobby Sullivan rested under a simple granite headstone that read only his name, his dates of birth and death, and the words Korean War veteran, as if a lifetime of love and loneliness could be summarized in a few carved letters. Dylan knelt in the snow and placed a cup of Dunkin' Donuts coffee on the grave, still steaming in the cold air. The kind of gesture Bobby would have appreciated from someone who understood that respect comes in many forms. "Thank you for believing I was worth saving," Dylan whispered to the headstone, his words carrying across the quiet cemetery like a promise. "I'm going to use this gift to help other kids who need someone to believe in them too." When we choose compassion over judgment, we create ripples that extend far beyond our own lifetimes, touching lives we will never meet, but whose paths we help illuminate through simple acts of recognition and respect. 3 months later, spring arrived in Boston with the gentle persistence of hope returning to places that had known too much winter. Dylan Parker stood at the window of his Back Bay apartment, watching the Charles River flow between banks lined with cherry blossoms that painted the water pink with reflected petals, transforming the city into something that looked like a postcard from a life he was still learning to believe belonged to him. The apartment had become more than shelter, more than the four walls and roof that represented the difference between surviving and living. Books filled shelves that had once been empty, art covered walls that had once been bare, and photographs documented a life being rebuilt one careful day at a time. The centerpiece was a framed collection that told the story of chosen family, Bobby Sullivan in his Korean War uniform, standing beside a photo of Sarah Parker in her Mass General scrubs, and between them a recent picture of Dylan and Alex sharing dinner in the North End. 3 generations connected by love that transcended biology. The transformation hadn't happened overnight or without struggle. There had been difficult conversations with therapists who specialized in trauma and family rejection. Painful moments when grief ambushed Dylan without warning in grocery stores or coffee shops. Nights when the apartment had felt too quiet after years of sleeping, surrounded by city sounds and other people's breathing. Learning to live alone with his thoughts had been harder than learning to live without a home. But there had also been discoveries that surprised him with their power to heal wounds he thought were permanent. Dylan enrolled at Boston University to study social work, using his lived experience of homelessness and family rejection to understand how systems failed the people who needed them most desperately. His professors were impressed by the depth of insight he brought to discussions about poverty, mental health, and the particular vulnerabilities of LGBTQ youth who aged out of foster care or fled families that couldn't accept their identities. The Sarah and Bobby Foundation officially launched on Memorial Day weekend with an initial funding commitment of $500,000 from Dylan's trust fund and matching contributions from Alex's investment firm. The foundation established partnerships with Pine Street Shelter, the Boston Public Health Commission, and local organizations that served homeless teenagers, creating a network of support that addressed not just immediate needs like housing and food, but long-term challenges like education, mental health care, and family reconciliation when possible and healthy. The foundation's mission statement was simple but revolutionary in its implications. No young person would be turned away for being gay, transgender, or any other identity that families found difficult to accept. The foundation provided emergency housing, counseling services, educational scholarships, job training, and most importantly, the kind of chosen family support that every person deserves, especially during the vulnerable transition from adolescence to independent adulthood. Within the first quarter of operation, 12 young people had found safe housing through foundation programs, 6 had enrolled in community college or trade schools, and 3 had successfully reconciled with family members through mediated conversations that honored both personal authenticity and family relationships. Jamie Chen, who directed the local LGBTQ center, collaborated closely with Dylan to ensure services reached the teenagers most at risk, while Father Mackenzie from St. Augustine's Parish provided spiritual support despite pushback from conservative parishioners who questioned his involvement with gay youth. The foundation's success attracted attention from beyond Boston's borders. Dylan received invitations to speak at conferences about homelessness prevention, LGBTQ rights, and the power of unexpected allies to transform individual lives and systemic problems. His story resonated particularly with business leaders who recognize their own capacity to change lives through simple acts of acknowledgement and respect, through using their privilege and resources to create opportunities for people who had been denied them by circumstances beyond their control. But the moment Dylan treasured most happened on a quiet Sunday morning in April, when he was feeding ducks at Boston Public Garden, continuing a tradition he had shared with his mother since childhood, when life was simpler, but not necessarily better. His phone buzzed with a text message that made him smile with recognition and pride. The message came from Marcus, the first teenager housed by the Sarah and Bobby Foundation, a young man whose story paralleled Dylan's own journey from rejection to acceptance. "Thank you for believing I was worth saving." The message read, "I start college in the fall studying education because I want to teach kids that different doesn't mean damaged. I know Mom would be proud. She's watching from wherever people go when love calls them home." Dylan smiled, pocketing his phone as he scattered breadcrumbs across the water's surface, watching ducks swim closer with the trust that comes from consistent kindness. Around him, families enjoyed the warm afternoon. Children laughed on playgrounds. Couples walked hand in hand along paths that had once felt forbidden to someone like him. The city had become home again in ways he hadn't thought possible when winter seemed endless and hope felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. He thought about Bobby Sullivan, who had transformed a lifetime of loneliness into legacy through one decision to care about a stranger's son. About his mother, Sarah, who had loved without conditions and taught him that worthiness wasn't something you earned through performance, but something you possess simply by existing as your authentic self. And about Alex, who had discovered that success meant nothing without human connection, that redemption was always possible when guided by genuine remorse and the commitment to do better tomorrow than you did yesterday. The ducks swam closer, trusting Dylan's gentle presence in the way that trust builds slowly between beings who have learned to recognize safety when they find it. Dylan had learned something profound about trust during these months of rebuilding his life from the foundation up. That family isn't defined by who shares your blood, but by who shares your belief that everyone deserves love, safety, and the chance to become who they're meant to be without apology or explanation. Have you ever experienced kindness that completely changed your life's direction? That made you believe in possibilities you had given up hoping for? To share your story below and help someone else believe in the transformative power of human compassion. Subscribe to Heart Stories for more journeys that prove love wins when we choose courage over comfort, connection over isolation, hope over despair.